something I want to do today is I want to take a look at some of the stuff that's been going on in the TCG at the moment, which means we're going to be recapping some of the biggest nationals that have happened in Europe. And just, I want to lead it to a more generic discussion about the current TCG format, because I feel like it's a good time with Alliance Insight format basically being in full swing, right? Like Alliance Insight has been out for a while, tournaments have been happening, nationals have been happening, European national season is even coming to a close soon-ish. Like UK and Germany are two really big nationals that are still left, but like a lot of them have already happened, like French and Italian, which we're also going to take a look at today. And I just want to talk about, is Alliance Insight format good? Is it bad? Because of course we are coming off the back of one of the best ban lists in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, in my opinion, still. But of course Alliance Insight had some pretty powerful cards in it, and so I want to maybe like, I just want to talk about that. You know, is the Alliance Insight format good or is it bad? Is it okay? Where do we stand on it? So that's something we're going to take a look at. And in order to do that, I think it's a good time to take a look at some of the tournament results from the recent weeks, starting with the two biggest nationals in Europe so far, which was French nationals and also Italian nationals. French nationals happening a week ago and Italian nationals happening just this past weekend, yesterday and the day before. In France, we saw a pretty Malice dominated top cut, I would say. In top 8, we had 5 Malice decks, and then Mitsurugi was still a pretty big player in the tournament. I myself played French nationals and ended up top 32 with pure Mitsurugi, which is a thing, but pure Mitsurugi overall, I think, is the less popular version of the deck. Like, for example, in this tournament, there was a lot more Ryziel Mitsurugi than pure Mitsurugi. But of course, I mean, everyone knows Malice to be one of the biggest players in the current format. And then vice versa in Italian nationals, actually, we don't have the entire top cut breakdown yet because they just happened. But for this one, you actually have a completely different picture, which is interesting, because in top 8, you have 0 Malice. Instead, there is 4 Mitsurugi in top 8 here in Italy, and the first Malice deck is in top 16 here by Lorenzo Muselli. Other than that, I'm sure there's more Malice somewhere in top cut, but it's incomplete information at the moment, and we only know of 1 Malice even in top 16. The tournament was won by Memento here, which is pretty cool to see. I followed the coverage a little bit over the course of the weekend, and Mitsurugi was a big deal at that tournament, but another thing was also the Heraldic Ryziel, which we're going to take a look at in a second. Heraldic Ryziel even going through to the full length of main decking Sales ban to counter Droll and Lockbird, because the deck is so ignorant when it doesn't get Drolled or Charmied that people were like, I'm just gonna main deck outs to Droll and Lockbird, go first and beat them up. That's a thing, right? Then we also had Danish nationals happening over the course of the weekend, which had a lot of German participation here. I guess it is kind of close, and it actually was won by Eric with Horace Christian. I'm going over these results just to showcase that we are in actually a relatively diverse format where a lot of different decks can do well. Even though Ryziel, Mitsurugi, and Malice take up majority of top cut spots at the moment, and also the most played decks in these tournaments are Malice and Ryziel Mitsurugi, but there's a lot of different decks putting up results. You know, sometimes you have one tournament that is pretty dominated by Malice, then you have another tournament where Malice is basically completely absent. You have different Mitsurugi variations doing well, you have Mermail doing well, you have Heraldic Ryziel doing well, you have Memento winning a tournament here, then you have Christian winning a tournament here. It's a relatively diverse format, and I think that is one factor that people find very enjoyable in Yu-Gi-Oh formats. But I have said in the past that I don't think diversity is the only thing to look at when you judge a format, because even when there is multiple different decks, there is still a world where the play patterns of those decks are a little questionable or not as fun. And I'll talk about that, especially because I think one of the main critique points that people have for this format at the moment is that they find one card to be extremely dominant and extremely annoying to play against, and that card is obviously Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird is arguably one of the most popular cards in the format, and probably one of the most hated cards in the format as well. And a set of cards that I personally don't feel as negatively towards, but people definitely do, is the Mole Charmies. And I mean, as much as I like the Mole Charmies, in terms of like, I think the Mole Charmies existing is fine. I think it sometimes becomes a little bit of a problem when you are forced to main deck like 6 or more Charmies, because otherwise you can't handle the decks in the format going second, because playing Charmies in your main deck introduces a lot of variance to your tournaments, because because when you go first, sometimes you open multiple Charmies and it makes your hands a lot worse. And so in an ideal world, for me personally, I would like the Charmies to exist, but I would like the format to be balanced to a point where I can just side deck the Charmies for the really problematic decks. I don't have to main deck them. And this is not a format we're in right now. We are in a format where a couple of decks, even though their win rates and their representation are kind of balanced, the play patterns that they introduce to the game are pretty broken, actually. And I'm talking about, for example, Ryziel Mitsurugi here. I'm talking about Malice, and I'm also talking about decks like Heraldic Ryziel. I couldn't find the list from Italian Nationals yet because they just happened, but this is one from that won, I believe, a state championship. Oh no, it was second place at Swiss Nationals. This one doesn't have Salesban in it, but one of the more recent trends with this deck has been main decking Salesban just to be able to go ahead and combo through Droll as consistently as possible. But basically what you will find with a lot of these decks, like in this one, you will find 3 Fuva, 3 Perulia, 3 Droll and Lockbird, and so on and so forth. Also, Atlantean Mermail is a thing in the current format, of course, and Memento also, even though Memento is kind of I like Memento, but it still is very much a combo deck that tries to set up very, very, very powerful boards. Mermail, Memento, Heraldic Ryziel, Malice, and Ryziel Mitsurugi, in my opinion, and even Crystron, are all decks that are very, very combo heavy and very, very powerful. And essentially, if they go unanswered by Charmies or Droll and Lockbird, they will set up boards that most of the decks in the format cannot handle. This list even going to the full extent and even main decking Thrust and Harpy's Featherstorm as an answer to getting Droll and Lockbirded or Charmied, where you just thrust for Featherstorm to skip your opponent's turn back. We also have seen, I don't know if there's any decks here that have this technology, but over the course of the weekend, we also saw a lot of decks using Protoss and Eschatos with Infernal Flame Banshee to search Nemesis Flag and then get into those kind of cards. So it is on the cover. I think this is a very diverse format. The deeper you look, you will find a lot of decks that have very much the same flavor of trying to auto win on the first turn. Ryziel Mitsurugi, as much as I am a fan of Ryziel individually and Mitsurugi individually, I feel like this deck, this pairing of engines, is something that is a little bit problematic because it produces a deck that is, I think, too powerful. And I think in general, Star Ryziel, as powerful of a card as it is, I don't like the fact that this card exists because I think it takes away something very, very important from Ryziel, which I always thought was very important for the deck's balance, which was a choke point. When Star Ryziel didn't exist, you could very easily hold your Ash or your Ghost Ogre or whatever for the duo drive. You no longer can do that because if your opponent starts with Ice Ryziel, they can summon Star Ryziel and they will have cross before they make duo drive. And so basically the whole point of holding, let's say you have Ash Nibiru or something, you can no longer prevent the cross from happening with just Ash Blossom. You just have to gamble on the first Ryziel and hope they don't have a second one. Like if they normal summon Ice and you have Ash Blossom, I do think now in this format, it is correct to just Ash it because otherwise they will have cross anyways. And so like it removes the choke point from Ryziel, and as a result, I think these Ryziel hybrid decks are definitely too powerful for my liking and a little bit too over the top, as well as of course Ignis de Malice, even though it is not a tier 0 threat, I think is still kind of the same play pattern where you make a board that your opponent can play into the Malice board, but you're always going to win because your follow-up is just so crazy, and you do have a very, very high amount of disruptions with this deck. And Heraldic Ryziel is just another thing, right? Like it plays Star, it plays Cross, so it's very hard to hand trap with anything that isn't a Floodgate hand trap. Basically anything that isn't Droll or one of the Charmies like Lingering is going to be very, very mediocre. And we see this trend a lot in current decks. We see the numbers of Effect Veilers, the numbers of Imperms, the numbers of Inibirus, like those cards are getting taken out of decks over and over and over. More and more people are taking those cards out of their decks because they feel like the quality of those cards is just like not really there, right? They just lose quality so much because most decks play through those cards like it's nothing with one extender. So yeah, and then of course, I mean, decks like Mermail, we don't even have to talk about why this deck is a problem. I mean, you see here Barrier Statue, Minstrel, Mooling Glacia, all the good stuff. Mermail, even with the Bahamut Shark and the Abyss Dweller ban, is still a very, very obnoxious deck to deal with and very hard to play into if you don't have a Charmy or a Droll and Lockbird. Basically, 4 decks in the format right now that have very, very similar play patterns, in my opinion, make it, I think, less diverse in reality than it is on paper. Now, I will say one thing. The existence of Molcharmy Fuvalos, Molcharmy Perulia, and Droll and Lockbird makes it so that there is counterplay to this deck, to these decks. And I have experienced this because I was wondering about this when I thought about it after French Nationals, because I genuinely had a good time playing French nationals because I did something that for me, it was an approach that worked because I played pure Mitsurugi. This is my list. I main decked Fuva, Perulia, and Droll and Lockbird because I realized I need those to win going second. And what I encountered was a format where my deck is not that weak to the Charmies with pure Mitsurugi, but I have all the tools I need to win going second. It just made it so I very, very rarely had to sit through those full combos because I played all the answers to these decks. Now, here's the question. Is a format good if you have to draw a Charmy or a Droll and Lockbird going second against a lot of the top decks in the format? Because your chances at drawing one of these cards is if you main deck all 9 is pretty high. Very, very often you do play real Yu-Gi-Oh in this format, but it still is not optimal, I think. The way I feel about it is like it's somewhere in the middle because it could be a lot better. We could be living in a world where these cards are not even necessary in your main deck because the popular decks are like a little bit fairer, but we could also live in a world where these decks exist and there's no counterplay because there is a lot of counterplay at the moment. The problem is it is always tied to variance. It is tied to playing those 9 in your main deck, and it is tied to seeing one of those when you're going second. And the thing is, what I experienced is that every time I drew one of those cards, or maybe even 2, my games going second were actually pretty good games because the Charmies and Droll against most of the top tier decks, they don't stop them from playing completely. They do still do some stuff like Detonator Pass and have their own non-engine next to it. And most of the time playing into those kind of boards ended up in like pretty good games for me. So I don't feel like the current format is bad. I just feel like we do need to do something about the power level of some of these combos still. I think specifically Ryzeal is something that when people were playing mostly pure Ryzeal, I think it was fine. But as soon as people start throwing multiple engines into the deck because the deck has very not great restrictions, it just becomes a little weird. Like maybe the mono Ryzeal combo is something you can handle. If it's like Detonator Cross, maybe you can play into it. But when it's Detonator Cross plus the full Mitsurugi combo plus follow-up, so like basically you have to discard a card, you get Raigeki'd, plus they have all the Ryzeal stuff, all of a sudden it becomes unbreakable. Malice is really hard to break as well if they set up fully because you basically have to kill them, which is not very easy. Then you have Heraldic Ryzeal, which is probably the most outrageous example of this, which is like the most auto-lose deck into Droll and the Charmies you can play in the current format. But if you don't get Drolled or Charmied, you completely take apart everything. Like this deck does it all. This deck makes so many rank 4s. It's not even funny. Like you can hand loop your opponent twice with Ouroboros and Eclipse Twin reviving Ouroboros. You can set up like Detonator Cross. This even plays Plasma Hole for more disruption. Like this deck is in all intents and purposes an auto win deck on the first turn, and so is Mermail, right? And so like this is where Yu-Gi-Oh is at the moment. I feel like it is still a lot better than last year. Alliance Inside format is not perfect, and that's kind of where I want to go with this discussion. Is like basically now we have problems in the format, but we also have answers. But the thing is, you need to draw those answers. If you don't draw those answers, the gameplay is pretty mid. I saw this on Italian national streams where there was Mermail, I think, made it all the way to top 4, and like yeah, there was a matchup where it was Heraldic Ryzeal versus Atlantean Mermail, and it's like, bro, at this point you are just rolling a dice to see who goes first, and then you're rolling another dice to see whether you have Droll or the Charmies in hand. And if you don't have those, then whoever wins the dice roll just wins against everything. Ban Droll. See, Droll and Lockbird, I will say right now, I don't think you can just ban Droll and Lockbird and call it a day, because at the moment, I am glad Droll and Lockbird exists as an answer to these decks. I'm not saying Droll and Lockbird is a healthy card. At the moment, I think the format would be a lot worse if you just, every time you go second, you never have Droll, and then you always get full comboed by Ryzeal, Mitsurugi, Heraldic Ryzeal, Malice, and Mermail. So like, yes, Droll is an indicator of the current format not being great, but they should probably get rid of those decks as well if they want to get rid of Droll. At the moment, and I hate this argument, but at the moment, Droll and Lockbird is a necessary evil for this format. If they want to get rid of Droll and Lockbird, they have to get better, or they have to balance some of the things that are happening at the moment. Ryzeal is the main thing that's currently making people play Droll and Lockbird, I think, because against pure Mitsurugi, Droll and Lockbird isn't even that crazy. That was one of the reasons why I played it. Droll is good against it, but it's not as bad. Like if you have like 2 Ryzeal cards in your hand, or like friggin' 7th Tachyon, or even 7th Ascension, Droll and Lockbird hits you a lot harder than when you're playing pure Mitsurugi. So yeah, Droll and Lockbird and understand these decks kind of go hand in hand. Like if people weren't playing such crazy combo decks right now, then people wouldn't be main decking Droll and Lockbird, but people are playing those crazy combo decks, so people obviously are playing Droll and Lockbird. Yeah, I like the way you put it. Droll isn't the problem. Droll being necessary is the problem. That is the way I put it. That is also exactly the way I feel about the Charmies. I don't think Charmies are badly designed Yu-Gi-Oh cards. The fact that people are main decking 6 Charmies right now is crazy, because that tells you a lot about the power level of the decks in the format. I don't want to play Charmies in my main deck because they are designed, like, I mean, they are the ideal side deck cards because you want them in your deck going second. You want them in your deck when your opponent is playing a deck that's really weak to it. You don't want to draw Molcharmi, Perulia, and Fubalos when you're going first. It doesn't feel great that I have to put these cards into my main deck. Now, granted, if I put those 6 cards into my main deck, my experience at the French Nationals was completely fine. I was actually enjoying the tournament because I didn't get full comboed on a lot of the time. My deck was prepared. You know, I played Fuva, Perulia, and Droll are like the cards that say, if you draw these cards going second, it makes the game enjoyable. And so, like, that's a good thing. It's good for games to be enjoyable. And by enjoyable, I mean that they are actually good games. They don't are like, I activate Fuva and my opponent just dies immediately. No, I activate Fuva or Perulia, my opponent still makes a board in this format. Malice still makes half boards. Raziel Mitsurugi makes half boards. They all make half boards under Charmies. The game is not over. But the argument is basically, I would rather not have to rely on drawing those cards to make the game playable. I would like the game to be playable from the get-go. That's kind of where I'm at the moment. And this is kind of, I guess, a segue to talk about what is about to happen soon, because I mean, this format is the way it is, but like, we're gonna have to look forward to what's about to happen. And I guess the best place to look for that is what it's looking like in the OCG at the moment, except for Mitsurugi. They don't have Mitsurugi over there, which, to be fair, Mitsurugi changes a lot about the current format. One, this entire discussion, it kind of begs the question of the position of hand traps in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, what is it with hand traps where I feel like a lot of decks are inclined to play those sort of hand traps? Like, even here, we see the 6 Charmies and the Droll. We still see Ghost Bell, Imperm, Nib, and Ash. I mean, Ash mostly as an answer to Charmies. People are still inclined to play some hand traps. People want to play some answers to your opponent's combos. These cards just don't feel ideal, but you also don't feel comfortable moving them out of your deck completely. And so it kind of begs the question, like, where are we headed with Yu-Gi-Oh! And hand traps? Because it doesn't quite work when the quality of hand traps declines so much in recent formats that, like, you just don't have any available answers, because some of these modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, like Heraldic Raziel, cannot get properly hand trapped except by Charmies and Droll, and you cannot board break it. So what's the solution? You know, what's the solution? Do you just make more and better hand traps? Do you make more floodgate hand traps? I don't think that can be it. And currently the approach in the OCG seems to be that a lot of the top tier decks here, for example, Vanquish Soul K9, relies on more in-engine heavy hand, basically ways to interact with your opponent. Like this deck over here, from the modern standpoint, it plays 3 Fuva, 3 Ash, 2 Maxi, which wouldn't be legal in the TCG, 1 Shifter, and then 1 Phantasme, which I don't think counts as a hand trap because it just draws cards. It doesn't interrupt anything. So this is 9 hand traps in the best deck in the OCG right now. So how is this possible, right? Like how is a deck with 9 hand traps competing in current OCG when the power level of the OCG is arguably a lot higher than the TCG, because they still have Appaloosa, they have Baron, and so on and so forth. So the way this works is they have made more cards that are basically in-engine hand traps, right? Like the K9 cards, even though it is its own archetype, they function as hand traps, as well as the new K9 monster, which lets you special summon. If you have the right attributes in your hand, you can just special summon it from your hand on the opponent's turn, and then you can summon a Vanquish Soul from your deck, which means you can special Raisin into the column where you want to destroy something, and so on and so forth. So this deck operates more on hand traps that are like, it's kind of like more Tierleman's Havness is the way you're putting it in chat right now, which is it's kind of accurate, where you kind of operate more with your engine on the opponent's turn, which I think is a good approach, because those cards, unlike certain hand traps, they will not clog your hands when you're going first, right? Like I would rather have cards that are in my engine that I can use going first or second over cards that are basically just one purpose, right? Like an infinite impermanence in your deck has one purpose, and if you draw that infinite impermanence going first, it does not add anything to your playability of your hand, right? If your hand's a brick because you've drawn 2 imperms and an Ash Blossom, can't really do much about it. You're just gonna set your imperms and pass, or keep it in hand. I don't know. Essentially, this is an approach that they are doing in the OCG right now. I think some other decks are doing it too. Yummy, not really. Okay, there's no other lists here, but some other decks definitely do this as well. And so that is, I think, interesting. It's an interesting approach to modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think it would be a way to get away from this. But in general, I think one of the most obvious solutions to this 100% is just we need some balancing on some of these archetypes, right? Like, I mean, Ryziel Mitsurugi, as much as I love Mitsurugi and as much as I like pure Ryziel, or I liked pure Ryziel before Star came out, this deck does too much. This deck does too much. This deck does too much. And this deck also does too much. I mean, this deck also arguably does too much. So that's the thing, right? So even though the most recent ban list did a lot of things in the right direction, I think there's still a couple of cards. And like, I think besides the decks doing too much, I also think there's a couple of individual cards that are causing a lot of problems because they are legal. And we're looking at one right now, and that's Harpy's Featherstorm, right? Like this package of, oh, there's counterplay to my Ryziel Mitsurugi deck in the form of Purulia or Drolan Lockbird. Okay, let me just go thrust for Featherstorm and skip your entire turn so I can play next turn uninterrupted when those cards wear off. Another card, Arch Nemesis Protoss. I don't really have a list right here that plays it, but I saw it a lot over the weekend at Italian Nationals. A lot of different decks were doing the rank 4 Banshee into Protoss kind of thing. And so those kind of cards existing also don't help. In some ways, this format reminds me of 2022 Nationals format, where there was a lot of different decks like Branded or Sword Soul or Adventure stuff, DPE, whatever. But if you really look closely, it was like all of those decks were just trying to find their way of floodgating the opponent, right? Like it was like, okay, this deck Artifact Scythe, this deck also Artifact Scythe. Even Sword Soul, which is one of the most fair archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, the main advantage of playing Sword Soul was that it could play a lot of floodgates for going first after siding, and it was drawing a lot of cards because it played like Desires and drew with Moyi and stuff like that. And you just like make your combo, you're really, and it also played Protoss, true. So it's kind of like that format, which was very diverse, but I still didn't like it. It is that format, but better, because that format had like no equivalent of the Charmies, which I do think the Charmies make this format better at the moment. I really do think so. I think without the Charmies, I think this format would be unbearable, because going second, you would basically always lose. And Droll to an extent, but I don't want to speak too positive about Droll because I don't like that card that much. It's basically like 2022 format, but with Charmies that make it a little bit more playable for the player going second. Charmies also, I like the fact that Charmies promote some strategies that are not that crazy when they go first. Like, for example, I don't know, Emre's Blue Eyes deck he took to top 8 at French Nationals, or the pure Mitsurugi deck that I played. Like both decks that are like lower ceiling, but because everyone is playing Charmies, they get a little bit better. It's a legit advantage right now if your deck does not care about Charmies. That's like a good thing for a deck in the current format. And so, yeah, this is kind of like how I see it. It's still not ideal. I still think it could be a lot better, which is ultimately the point of this discussion. I want to make these points. I want to acknowledge the things that have gotten better about the game, because I mean, still, if you ask me, would you rather play this format or would you play Snake Eye Tenpai format, I would pick this format 100 out of 100 times. It is a lot better because a lot more games are playable and enjoyable because of the Charmies. But still, I'm not happy with the fact that it's basically like when you go second this format, step 1 is draw Charmy or Droll, which you have a pretty good percentage of drawing those cards when you play all 9. But I think it shows that there's some problems still when it's required to draw those cards, is how I feel. This format or Master Duel format, bro, it's always this format, of course. Like genuinely, I think this format is fine. I actually don't hate it. I had a good time at French Nationals, but I still acknowledge that there's problems with it.